Welcome to 300 AD in the Empire of Ghana. Load up your camel for training and let's take off across the desert in this 7th grade edition of the Hauger History podcast.
Bandwidth for Hauger History provided by Podbean.com. Thousands of free podcasts to start your own today at Podbean.com.
Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Hauger History for new episodes and subscribe to Hauger History Podcast on iTunes.
You must trade to get paid from the west coast of California to the western part of Africa. Today we are discussing the foundations of the Empire of Ghana. There are 3 main vegetation zones in West Africa. What is a vegetation zone, you ask? I say raise your hand and I will tell you once again. A region that has certain types of plants, and there's 3 different zones. There's desert, grasslands, and forests, which may surprise you and you may not already know about the geographic region of West Africa. Soil and climate, we've talked about it before. The very first thing I told you in my first history class was that people need food to live, and if you can't get food regularly, you will not thrive as a civilization, and moreover, you will never grow because you are always hunting and gathering and not able to adapt or build your society. So, for example, a desert has a dry climate, and only plants that use little water grow there, and that's not going to be the best for supporting an entire civilization unless that civilization can trade, and that's a big part of what we're going to talk about today. First off, let's go from north to south. The northern section of West Africa is part of a large desert. It's known as the Sahara or the Sahara Desert. The middle section of West Africa is a savanna. That means that it's flat, it's grassy, and has scattered trees. Forests make up the southern region of West Africa, and you'll remember from our study of Mesopotamia in 6th grade that the Niger River is one of the major life-giving rivers that runs across West Africa. For centuries, the river has been used for transportation and communication. So when you think about the river, don't just think of its fluidity in terms of use for crops or irrigation. You can send goods and trade to get paid along those waterways on the Tigris, and also to spread communications and messages. Remember the term cultural diffusion, the spread of not just goods, but ideas along trade routes. The Sahara has a very interesting deposit. And I'm not talking about the bank account, although there was a lot of wealth to be made in the Empire of Ghana because of salt. Crops such as millet, corn, they grow well on the savanna. Millet, a relation to corn. Kind of a seeded grass. And I always love talking about events way back when that still affect us today. 97% of millet production is still made today in developing countries, according to numerous sources that have come up. They grow well in high temperature and dry climate. So headed back, the Sahara has rich deposits of salt. These crops grow well in the savanna. The southern forests hold large amounts of gold. So gold and salt were 2 very, very valuable resources. In fact, one of the richest men of all time, Mansa Musa, convinced people and salt was so valuable for preserving foods and so many other uses that he could trade salt for gold back in the day. And that's going to mean big dollars in your bank account. Yeah, they probably didn't have bank accounts. Let's just move on. People in the savanna and forests of West Africa had gold, but they did want salt. People in North Africa had salt, but they wanted gold. So as a result, there was a trade across the Sahara, or trans-Saharan trade. And that meant that people in Sahara would mine salt and then trade it for the gold mined in the forests of West Africa. Around the time period that we're talking about, which is 300 AD, savanna and forest people began to use camels to transport their goods. That's something that we have deep in our imagery from documentaries and footage that we see in school and in our books and in magazines and in photos on Pinterest. Pinterest not invented at this time, so don't get off on that tangent. Camels would cover so much distance, and they didn't need much food or water. Which, remember, if you were in the Sahara Desert, you would not have much water, and food would be scarce as well. So these qualities made camels just perfect for carrying these goods and making trade possible with large amounts of goods covering large amounts of land. Absolutely essential to studying the region is that knowledge. This actually fuels quite an empire, this ability to trade across this sparse area of desert. And it continued to make an impact for centuries in those vegetation zones. And once you had camels, you really had vehicles for trade. This was the foundations of the empire. Food could reach Ghana from the south. The people of Ghana could be supervising and charging people for the resources that would pass through their land, going to the Middle East, to Europe, to Asia. And the people living in land were forced to give a tribute or tax to Ghana's king for using his land. And in the 1200s, which I know we were talking about a large amount nearly 900 years later, Ghana and the city of Kwambai Sale was the center of the empire, had a population of more than 16,000 people. People even raised camels and established trade routes from the Arab world and the Umayyads and the Berbers. So lots of different language, ideas, and items were being traded. It's a critical part of understanding this unit. Salt was just simply amazing. Pits were filled with it from the water from the ocean. The water evaporated, leaving behind salt. This is part of the process. When it comes to the harvest, the salt was still damp, would be removed from the pit. Then it was transported by a shaping and drying area. It was brought there, hardened, and then the salt would be ready for transport and trade. It was dug up and mined also, and the caravans, they traded all over that region with people from all over the world, enabling them to get goods and resources that would not otherwise be found in their own territory. Mali was actually able to build on Ghana's foundation, and that was in about 1250. The empire formed in the southern area of what had been covered by Ghana. Sundiata came to power and developed the city of Timbuktu, which I knew as Little One from Looney Tunes cartoons, but other people told me was actually significant as I would grow and enter my own education. Timbuktu became one of the most famous centers of Islamic scholarship around the world, and Sundiata was very popular and still considered by a hero of the Malinke people who still reside in the West Africa region. Did I need a reason to say region? I didn't, and I said each one probably about 3 times now. I talked earlier about Mansa Musa. He's still considered the richest person of all time in many of those lists of, like, if you converted today's dollars back to these people dollars. These people meaning historical people, of course. Anyways, on his pilgrimage in 1324, he was going to Mecca as one of the 5 pillars, the Hajj of Islam, that said all people at least once in their life should go. And he actually brought 1,200 slaves, 80 camels, and 300 pounds of gold, and rode on horseback. In front of him were 500 of the slaves, each dressed in silk and carrying a gold staff. You can imagine that is quite an entourage to be entering that area. And Mansa Musa returned to Mali with an architect and Arab scholars. They dedicated a mosque in Timbuktu, and this was an early place where religious scholars, on the back of the wealth and trade that Mansa Musa had as emperor in the year 1307, and they were teaching history, theology, and law. So it was the first example in quite a while, and in this region, where some of the best artists, artisan craftspeople, and free thinkers could go and share their ideas as a hub of not just trade, you see, but these ideas, this cultural diffusion that would come along from all of this beneficial expansion and relative peace. Although there were external problems in the north, Mali's territory was captured by Berber nomads in 1430, and throughout that decade were attacked. And by 1500s, the territory had been reduced to the original area of the Malinke people, and Mali was no longer the empire that it maybe could have been if given a little more time to prosper. But we see the examples of first times that people are actually thriving and doing so well in that region. And that's just a tip of the iceberg, historically speaking, but it's enough to get a big picture idea into why we study Africa, getting into the medieval years, and how much influence that happened, and early expansion and trade, and absolutely essential details that brought mercantilism to a new light and supported people in many difficult regions to live. And a lot of those roots still continue today. So thank you so much for listening to Hauger History. Don't forget to subscribe to us on iTunes and on Twitter at Hauger History. You can also email us at haugerhistory@gmail.com. Coming up on the podcast, an interview with the most famous and newly re-revered, just pioneered that name, Alexander Hamilton will join us for a very special interview. You don't want to miss it. Make sure you subscribe. That's it, guys. Class is dismissed. A 9-minute episode, and be with you again shortly. Thanks so much for your support, and thanks for following us on Twitter at Hauger History. We'll talk to you later. Push in your chairs, please.